Hey everybody, thanks for joining me for another episode of Think Your Way to an Epic Life. And my next guest, Captain Biss, has definitely done that. He has thought his way to an epic life. Don't get me wrong, thinking alone doesn't do it. There's a lot of action behind it, and this podcast is action-packed. He's a TED Talk speaker. He's a very, very well-respected speaker all over the place. He's esteemed for his work on recovery, addicts and recovery. His insights are absolutely stunning, and the tools that he has to help people get from transitioning from the military out, or even if you're transitioning from incarceration, or if you're transitioning on moving to the other side of the country. All of those things take a lot of energy, a lot of psychic energy, and this man has got answers for you. Hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Get ready to take some notes. So, Garret, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about this.
Yeah, it's been very fun for me doing a little research on you, and I have a huge spot in my heart for veterans and for the military, and I'm so grateful. And so, thank you for your service. I'll start off with that.
Thank you.
However, you've moved past the military, and you have created, which is really tough for a lot of veterans, you've created a wonderful life in the civilian world. You've written some books and that kind of stuff, as I talked about. But tell me a little bit about your transition into civilian world.
Yeah, certainly. So it was all roses and unicorns prancing. And no, actually, unfortunately, my journey was a very common journey that I hear from a lot of veterans. So transitioned from the military service, and then very quickly began to realize that there was something was missing. There was a void inside. Parts of myself I felt I was disconnected from, really lost some identity, lost connections, and created a really dark place, a really bad place where ultimately I was experiencing, panic attacks, a lot of anxiety. And it was very unsettling for me because I wasn't used to this, and I wasn't expecting to deal with some of the emotional and mental health challenges as I transitioned out of the military, especially coming from a career in the service where you have an identity, you have a sense of meaning, you understand your place, in your unit, in the world, you understand what value you're providing to the country. To have that confidence and that positive self-identity that comes from that, I didn't realize how strong of a foundation that created for my identity, for who I was, and the confidence that I had to do the things that I was engaged in until it went away. And even as it was going away, and even as I began to just struggle with some of the depression, with some of the lack of self-esteem, with a lot of the many other symptoms of mental health challenges that many veterans face, I didn't understand. I just knew that something was missing and something didn't feel right inside. So unfortunately, like a lot of veterans do, I didn't want to feel pain. A lot of people don't want to feel pain and suffering. And, there were things I'd been introduced to in my life, or just, alcohol, some other behaviors that I knew, hey, this thing helps me not feel this way. And I don't want to feel this way. So I began relying on things that weren't going to lead me in a positive direction. And then ultimately got to a place where the thoughts of taking my own life became more and more prevalent. And it was really at the moment that they didn't shock me anymore. I mean, I think it's probably normal. I think many people, if not most people, have had a thought at some point in their life. Excuse me. And it can seem not normal, and it can seem shocking, like, oh, where'd that thought come from? That's weird. And then we kind of quickly push it out of our mind and go forward. But when those thoughts became more prevalent and it no longer shocked me, it almost felt normal to think that way. I realized that I was getting closer to a line that, as we hear often, 22 veterans a day cross a certain line and they do something that permanently reduces or removes the pain that they're feeling. I couldn't tell you at that time how close I was to crossing that line. I didn't think it was a day away, probably not a week away, but I couldn't tell you with certainty that I wasn't going to cross that line. So fortunately, it kind of shook me awake in a sense and scared me into, or helped me really appreciate the fact that something had to change and I needed to do something about it. So I was very fortunate. I connected with a great mentor and began to get some coaching to help me deal with some of the sources of that pain inside. And over a number of years, what I really become clear with and what I really understand is that regardless of what a service member experiences while they're in the military, that transition from military service itself can be traumatic. When we lose the way that we've met fundamental human needs, like the need for connection, like the need for authenticity and positive self-identity, the need for meaning, when all that's taken away from us in an instant, that experience itself can be traumatic. And I think this is what leads to the rates of addiction, the rates of mental health challenges, the rates of PTSD, and and the inflated rates of suicide in the veteran population.
It is so fascinating to me, and just the thought that I mentioned to you before we got going, that prisoners leaving prison feel totally lost. They don't know what to do. People don't think about that. And if we could, as a society, if we could stop for a minute and do what Stephen Covey said and seek first to understand and then to be understood, we would understand things and we would do things better. Absolutely. I personally, at every chance I get to work with a veteran in any capacity, they're hard. They're like farmers and ranchers as far as their work ethic, and how instantly they get close. You're best friends with these people immediately, and it's for real. What
Right.
is that about?
So, the bonds that we've really forged and that we developed through military service is something that's unique. Now, for us at the time, it doesn't seem unique. It's all we know, right? Like, as you're entering the service, 18, 22 years old, as you're entering the service, you're entering a world and you don't realize, I think, I didn't realize, and many veterans don't realize how different that experience is from the experience that other people have. We think, okay, I'm going to boot camp. I'm going to officer candidate school. I'm connected with some individuals. We form bonds because of the strain, the suffering that we go through. First and foremost, this fact that we all kind of raised our hand and stepped forward saying, okay, I'm willing to suffer. I'm willing to endure some hard times for the benefit of something that's greater beyond me. So we have that in common. But then through that development, through that journey of becoming a service member and the training that we go through in preparation for the jobs that we'll do, there's a lot of suffering. There's a lot of hard times. There's a lot of big obstacles that we have to overcome. And when you've done that with other individuals, it helps you feel much more closely connected to those individuals. But taking a step back for a second, like you talked about individuals transitioning out from incarceration, or individuals transitioning from a career to retirement, or transitioning from living on the East Coast to living on the West Coast. These are big transitions, and what I'm most closely connected to and most deeply understand that transition from military service. But I see a lot of the underlying issues and the underlying challenges that we face. It's not something that other people don't also face. And this is what really helped me get clear on, was that it's the transition. It might not be the hard time that you're entering, but it's the transition from what you've come to know as normal or how you've met your basic human needs that is lost, that really creates a lot of the challenges. And if you're going into a difficult situation, then it can make it that much harder.
Okay, so we're not going to go too far down this because I really do want to get to your books and your philosophy. But I would love it if you could give our listeners some tips on both sides. As a civilian with veterans in your world, as a veteran coming into the civilian world, how do we make it better?
Yeah, so great question. So really, that was the mission behind the TEDx that I delivered. So a lot of every veteran, when you transition out from the service, you go through a transition assistance program, and it's some preparation to help you get a job and make that transition more smoothly. Unfortunately, I don't remember, maybe that's a little different now, but I don't remember any mention of the emotional, the mental health, and even the spiritual challenges that you experience when you transition out. It was so focused on, all right, let's get that next job. Let's make sure that you have a housing situation, something positive that you're leaning into. So I didn't really understand or appreciate. Really, the only comment that I think I heard was, "Oh yeah, veterans tend to drink a lot, so be mindful of that and don't do that." Like, that was the only thing that really covered any of the emotional things that we might experience. So what I came to understand, and this is the mission I had behind this TEDx talk, is I just want to plant a seed. I just want individuals to understand that we have basic fundamental human needs. First and foremost is our need for connection. We're tribal creatures. Our bodies are hardwired for connection. We need that connection. There was even a recent Surgeon General's report that came out in a study that showed that a lack of proper social connection has the same adverse health effects on our longevity and our overall well-being as smoking 15 cigarettes or drinking 6 alcoholic beverages every single day. So we understand that that's bad, but even the lack of proper social connection, the lack of belonging, can have the same effects on our health. So just understanding that, I think, ahead of time and realizing and being told, okay, you're going to enter a dark time. These are some of the things that you're going to face or the challenges. That's a tremendous benefit to individuals before they go through that journey or that challenge. And the way I often express it is, if you and I were to go for a really long run or go have a hard workout or go for a long hike and we were sore afterwards, we were sore for a couple of days, well, that would make sense to us. We'd say, okay, I exerted my body, my muscles are repairing, there's going to be some soreness. But because we understand why that's happening, we also understand that it's going to fade away and that we'll move beyond it eventually. If you woke up one morning and you found your whole body aching and you were sore, or you had an internal void or an internal pain, you had no idea where it came from or how it got there, it's really hard to have hope that things are going to change and that they're going to get better. So that's why, I'm not sharing anything that's going to, maybe it'll help prepare individuals better for that transition, but it's not going to help them avoid some of those internal battles or challenges they're going to face. But if they have the understanding of where it's coming from and what it's about, then they can have a clearer understanding of, okay, there's a pathway beyond this and I can move forward.
Okay, so you were incredibly fortunate and had a mentor that carried you through. How does somebody find that?
That's a great question. So let's see, I'll take a step back and kind of look at this from a perspective of addiction. I've been spending a lot of my time in the last couple of years in the addiction world and talking about not only pathways into and out of addiction, how to support somebody's recovery from addiction, but also helping individuals connect with the right tools and resources for them. I recently heard that 31 million Americans are struggling with some form of addiction. It could be a substance, it could be a behavior, but it's something in their life that is creating a consequence, a negative consequence, and yet they're having a hard time getting rid of or moving out of that. So for everybody's journey into addiction or into a challenge where they have this compulsive behavior that's creating a negative effect on their life, that's 31 million different stories of circumstances, of experiences, maybe even of biology that lead somebody into that path. It's not going to be 1 or 10 or 100, pathways out of that. There's going to be 31 million, maybe, individual pathways out of that, of different resources, of different coaching, different support that helps individuals move beyond it. And the reason I think that's so important for people to understand is that maybe you're in a dark place, or maybe you read a book and you have this insight on, like, okay, here's a way that I can move, make a change in my life or achieve a certain outcome in my life. And that doesn't work for you. And then you hear of your friend or you hear of people on TV, oh, this really worked for me. Well, if we don't understand that every individual is going to have a different pathway to the place that they want to get to, then it can be disheartening and almost defeating to see other people using certain tools or certain methodologies or certain coaching. So what I always encourage individuals to do is, listen to yourself, listen to your body, feel things out. If they feel right, if they feel helpful, then lean into that. And if it feels like there's not a congruence there, there's some incoherence there, one of two things is happening. Either one, you're in denial and you're trying to avoid some of the hard things that you have to do to make some positive change in your life, or it's just that tool, that pathway is not right for you. Everybody is right now in a different starting place, and everybody, their imagination or their image of an ideal future is a different location. So for you to get from where you are to where you want to get to, it's going to be an individualized journey.
Man, that is so good. I've never heard anyone really talk about that. There are some things in common that will help everyone, right? Diet, exercise, deep breathing, meditation, your mental diet. There are some things that will help anyone. However, the same thing that helps me may not help you at all. That's very, very interesting take. Okay, so you get out of the military and you go through some tough stuff and you come out on the other side of it. You're on the other side of it. And what's the first positive thing that you do?
Wow, that's a great question. I don't know that this is necessarily a positive in totality, but trying to give back, trying to share what I learned, okay, I don't know what the heck that was behind me, but I found a way out. Let me see if this relates or this can help anybody else. So I say, I don't know that I'd identify that as 100% positive, because I suspect that there was some motivation to do that didn't necessarily come from a good place. I think, sometimes we do things and we can recognize the positive in it, or the good that will come out of it, or the reward that we'll get from it. And sometimes we do things because there's still like a hole inside of us, or something inside of us that needs to be proven or validated. So I think it was probably a combination of the both. but that's really what I started to do, was lean into. There was a lot of things I was introduced to in my own recovery journey that I found were not being shared or introduced, with other individuals who maybe went through a more traditional treatment pathway. So I wanted to take the things that I was exposed to and learned and try to share that with in a different context or with a different audience to help make a difference.
Very cool. So tell me about your books.
Yeah, so I've got a book. It's called The Spheres Approach to Happiness and Fulfillment. I started writing that during my last deployment, and it's really a philosophy or a framework. I don't know. I find frameworks very helpful for me to not only understand things for myself, but then also to relay or to share them with others. The Spheres Approach just talks about the world that we live in and the way that we experience our life. And the 30-second, the elevator pitch version of it is that I understand the world that we live in as comprised of, if we're at the center of it, the world around us is comprised of different spheres. There's an indirect sphere of everything that's happening in the world that doesn't directly affect us. Now, that might be the weather in another country. That might be a train derailment that happened out west or somewhere that's far away that doesn't touch or affect anybody. It might be the news of a company that just went bankrupt. There's a ton of and a ton of positive things too. There's a ton of things out there that don't directly impact us or influence us. However, if we're mindful of them, if we're plugged into them, if we're conscious or aware of them, it can have direct impacts on the way that we feel. So there's the indirect sphere that I refer to, and then the direct sphere. These are everything that does directly affect us that we need to respond or react to in a certain way. So if all the power went out right now and we got cut off of this recording, that's something that would directly impact me. If I went outside later when I leave here and it's pouring rain, like that's something that's going to directly impact me. However, with those things that impact us, there's certain laws or certain lenses with which we can look at any event or a circumstance in our life and find some positive from it, or find some positive response that we can do to win with whatever that situation is. And a lot of it comes back to the emotional response that we have to the things that happen. And then lastly, I call the action sphere. That's everything that we can touch or influence through our own actions. When we think about the World Wide Web, I mean, there's, that can go in many directions and do many things. But being mindful of this, and really this awareness came to me during my deployment when I remember that there was so this is at a time where we didn't have access to news. There weren't social media apps that we were scrolling through, watching videos all the time. So really our only access to the outside world, except for phone calls home or emails, was we had one news station that was streamed in that we could get on the internet. So I remember walking around our workstations, and every time I went into an office, there was the same news station, and there just happened to be a couple of horrific things that had happened that week. One was a train derailment, another was a factory explosion. And what I noticed that week was that the energy when you walked into these places, like everybody was in a really sullen mood, everybody seemed a little bit more depressed, everybody was, this awareness came to me, like, we're allowing all of this stuff into our mind, into our consciousness, and it doesn't directly affect us. Nobody knew anybody that was in the train derailment. Nobody knew anybody that was near the factory. However, it was having an impact on the way that we felt and the way that we showed up. So first and foremost, if we can be aware of these things that don't directly impact us and remove the negative things from that. Now, of course, we can get some positive benefit when we hear about good and beautiful things that are taking place that don't directly affect us. But if we can at least be aware of these things and label them and identify them as such, then this helps free up a lot of our time, energy, and attention to actually focus on the stuff that is on our plate that we do have to deal with. And then if we can be more mindful of the world and the experiences that we're creating around us by the way that we show up and the way that we interact with others, then this really helps us create an environment and an experience that is a much better, place that we want to be and a much better experience for us. So that's the quick gist of the Spheres approach. It's called the Spheres Approach to Happiness and Fulfillment.
I love it. So you're very into consciousness, and can you kind of explain for someone who really is, they hear the term and they love the people that are like that. They love to be around them, but they don't really get it. How would you describe someone who has a high level of consciousness?
Certainly. So I think, it's a capacity that we all have. And when we don't, it's just like a muscle. And if we don't exercise it, then it's going to get weak. And I think that we have an automatic, kind of thought process and, our muscle memory, automatic responses. And if we are not mindful of what we are doing, or if we're not mindful of the things going on around us, then we just revert to our default programming. when you become aware of the fact that you can affect the way that you respond, whether that's emotionally, physiologically, the way that you show up in the world, the way that you show up at work, the way that you show up with your family, when you can become more aware of the fact that you can override some of that default programming, this is where I think consciousness really lies. And I don't think anybody is 100% conscious all the time. And I don't trust that anybody is 100% disconnected from this conscious awareness or this mindfulness. But the more that we can become aware of it and then start to invite practices into our life to develop that, it sets us up to experience a much better version of our life. We're less at the whims of things going on around us that are creating effects or outcomes in our life. And we're more aware of the things that we can do or we can do differently in order to influence or change the outcomes and get what we want.
That was very well put. And I'm just a baby at it. I'm 6 months into it, but I'm like really heavy in, well, I can't say 6 months. I've been meditating for years, but like really, really heavily with a coach, and it is, things don't get under your skin, guys. I mean, you can function. You don't get, like when you're upset, you tend to hold your breath. When you're upset, breathe through it, just breathe into it and get to the other side of it and figure out what it's really about instead of shutting down. Okay. So
and that's the beautiful thing about it, is just having that awareness. And the way it's phrased a lot, or one kind of analogy of, is having an observer position over your life. So separating yourself from this default program that's running and taking a step back, as though you can almost see yourself in that scene and then begin to analyze, separating yourself, your identity, from the emotional responses that you're having, so that you can think more clearly and make some decisions. You talked about the effect on breath, so, and this is a sign to us that we are triggered or we're in a fight or flight state. And if you study or look at the way that the brain works, we have different parts of our brain and they function differently for different reasons. We have our autonomic nervous system. We have our mammalian brain. We have our brain, however you want to talk about it. So this is something that is designed to help keep us alive. And then we have a more beautiful and developed part of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, which helps us with executive function, which helps us with understanding, contextualizing things, planning, delayed gratification, all these wonderful things. Well, the challenge is, anytime that we are triggered, anytime that our default programming sees something or experiences something and it understands that to be a threat, well, the first thing it does is our prefrontal cortex kicks offline and our mammalian brain takes over, because it's going to try to navigate us out of that threat. Well, the challenge is, if we're trying to navigate out of that threat with our default programming or with the muscle memory that we've developed for dealing with things, and we have this habit, or we have these habits that have created negative outcomes in our life previously, well, we're going to continue to experience those same things unless we can change it somehow. So one great way to do that is by doing things, daily practices or daily things that we can do in order to help us release or relieve some of those things that can trigger us, so that we can more often have full control of our body, have full control of the prefrontal cortex, and be able to think through things. So I used to hear, and I used to believe that we couldn't think our way out of this fight or flight response. So like, once you're triggered, you're going to be, your body's going to be elevated, some physiological things adjust in your body, and you can't think your way out of it. Like, you can't think your way out of negative thoughts or negative thinking, these sort of things. So I really understood that, and it made sense to me, because the way that we think it out is through our prefrontal cortex. And if that thing's kicked offline and it's not operating right now, then who's going to communicate with our mammal brain that, okay, everything's fine, we can calm down? What I have come to learn is that we can communicate with that mammalian brain, and the way that we can do that is by modulating things that we still have control over. So you mentioned breath, and the thing that's so beautiful about our breath is our body communicates to us when we're triggered by modulating or by changing our breath. It'll do it by elongating our inhale, shortening our exhale as it's trying to hyperoxygenate our body, prepare us for that fight or flight, prepare us to respond to whatever the threat is or perceived threat is. We can also control our breath. And if we can change the way that we're breathing, then this sends a message to our mammalian brain or to our automatic nervous system that, okay, everything's calm and we can settle down. So that's a beautiful and very powerful and effective way. And actually one of my favorite things to do for the many ways that, these stress or that these triggers might show up in our life. And for somebody who's experienced trauma in the past, one thing I've most recently learned is that sometimes our scatterbrain, sometimes our inability to focus on something is a stress response, or it can be symptomatic of somebody who's experienced trauma in the past. So if you've ever found yourself sitting down at your desk, you got a lot of things to do, you got 50 tabs open on your computer, and now you're having a hard time discerning, like, what should I focus on now? Or where do I need my attention? This can be symptomatic of, or this can be a sign that you are that you're in that triggered state. It's something, you felt overwhelmed, and now that anxiety's kicked in, or you're feeling in that triggered state. So one thing that I like to do is even just some simple box breathing or simple diaphragmatic breathing for 30 seconds or for a minute. It really calms your body down. Another thing that I feel sometimes is tiredness. Like that overwhelm goes to, and then my body's trying to self-regulate by depressing, so bringing me back to a more settled state. But I found it as I can help that process by doing some diaphragmatic breathing. And it's amazing. I mean, it's more effective for me than drinking another cup of coffee, even getting up and walking around, or some other things that I'll do. But when I can just sit and give myself 30 to 60 seconds and do some box breathing or some 4-6-8 breathing, it's amazing the response that can have. And that's what I understand is going on, is that my mammalian brain is really kicked into gear. Now I'm having a hard time focusing. I'm looking for the greatest or most severe threat. And when I can calm myself down, then everything becomes more clear.
It's beautiful. And Mel Robbins stumbled on another way too, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, that she just stumbled on, and it was there the whole time, and it works. I mean, it's, you're like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then you're up, and you're like, wait, that actually worked. But it does. It takes you back into your frontal lobe, and then you can function. Okay.
And that's the challenge with it. It's so simple that it's like, no. There's not, in a whole industry of mental health professionals, there's not this laundry list of these pharmaceutical drugs that you can take. It couldn't possibly work if there's all these other things out there that are trying to help us with those same situations. But yes, it does. It absolutely does. And here's an important thing to know about that, which I really had to understand. So when you pick up tools like this, and when you find tools or practices that really help you this way, the most important thing to do is practice them when you don't need them. Because the more that we practice them when we're not triggered, or when we're in that calm place, what it's doing is it's developing that muscle memory to do it. And it's actually bringing us into some of those automatic habitual responses, or the default programming, so that it's a part of it, so that we have access to it when we need it. Because if we, I've talked with friends or coaching clients where they've called me like, hey, I know it's so simple, I know this is silly, but I can't remember that darn breathing thing that you do. Can you lead me through it real fast? Because they were in such a triggered state, they didn't have access to something that wasn't part of their muscle memory. So that's a very important, whether it's a gratitude practice, whether it's breathing exercise, whether it's breath work, any of those things, it's most important to do them at the times you don't need it, so that you have access to it and you can do it at the times that you do.
I couldn't agree more. And I would like to add that you're rewiring your brain. You are cleaning your cells, all of your cells, when you're doing deep breathing. And guys, I'm going to tell you, there is for free. Now I've got his paid thing, but for free, you can go on YouTube and go Breathe with Sandy. And this man has dedicated, you know who I'm talking about?
Oh yeah. Do it a couple times a week.
Come on. Oh, I love Sandy. Sandy rocks. I've got to get him on the podcast someday.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it rewires you guys. And I'm telling you, you really, the things that used to get under your skin and make you lose control, they don't anymore. You really only focus on the things in your sphere that you can touch, right? That you can impact. If it's outside of there, you're still loving and you still send love to people who are going through hard times, but you don't take it on personally as if you should suffer with them. You've got your own suffering. Am I right?
Absolutely. And I think of it, and I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit into this other framework that I'd love to talk about, but it's, when we do it in these self-care things, one way that I think about it is, as we're going through life, there's a lot of stuff that's happening in our life. There's a lot of stuff happening around us. It's almost like pushing a Swiffer mop, across your kitchen floor. Like, it's picking up stuff. We pick up stuff. And if we can regularly clean that and let it go, there's only so much that we can fit on our plate. So the more that we can remove things that aren't serving us, and the more that we can clean that, then the more that we can deal with, and the greater emotional resilience we have. So when these things do pop up, we're not already overwhelmed with all the stuff that we've been carrying, because we've been cleaning that, and we've been, whether it's rewiring our brain or whether it's just resetting our nervous system, we've been cleaning that so that we, in higher stress situations and in more challenging situations, we're showing up cleaned so that we can use our full capacity to deal with that. We're not bringing up, it's the, this time of year, is it Marley? in the Christmas Carol, who's got all these chains of stuff behind him that he's showing up when he shows up to Scrooge in his dream. He's got all these chains that he's carrying behind him. That's much like the way that we walk through life. If we don't process, if we don't let go of the thing that happened yesterday, the stressful situation that we dealt with last week, if we're not processing that and letting it go, then we're carrying it with us. And this is why normal things or not severe things can show up in our life and can kind of push us over, because we're carrying so much already. So that's why it's so important and effective to do some of these things regularly so we can hit, kind of reset.
Well, and that's why your message is so important, especially right now, because you said the number one thing is connection. You said that's the number one thing. And COVID put the nail in the coffin of connection in a huge way. So what are some of your answers? What are the answers you've come up with?
Well, one of the things I hate about the way that COVID was dealt with is we came up with this term, the social distancing. It should be physical distancing, because if we all could have wrapped our minds around that, it's not that we want to cut off social connections, but I think that, whether that's what we intended to do or not, a lot of people fell into this place where we were isolating. So one of the things that I found, and especially for veterans or anybody that's gone through a transition, before we can start to establish or foster new connections with others, we need to first connect with ourselves. We need to first connect with the good that's in us. Because if we are in a bad place, and if we've been dealing with some loss of positive identity or low self-esteem, it challenges the way that we can show up and foster connections. So I love a lot of the work and what Zig Ziglar shared. And he said, if you go into the world seeking friends, you're not going to find them anywhere. If you go in the world trying to be a friend, you're going to find them in abundance. And I think that's what's really important, is going into the world as the friend that you want to attract to you. It's not that other things outside of you are going to heal the things, within you and help you feel whole and complete. We need to show up in a way that we do feel whole and complete. And this is the challenge a lot of individuals coming out of the military that have lost that sense of identity and then find themselves in a place where they feel like they have to hide parts of them. So the other piece of connection that's very important, or that you really can't experience true beneficial connection or nurturing connection without it, is authenticity. So if connection is our permission to be part of a tribe, authenticity says that you can be a part of this tribe and you can show up expressing what you think, asking for what you need, and sharing how you feel without fear that you're going to lose that connection. And if somebody is in a really bad place, or really, in a hard place themselves, and they're starting to be overcome by self-deprecating thought or negative self-talk, this can affect the way that we feel about ourselves. So what we do is we tend to put on a mask and we hide those parts of us that we don't want other people to see. Well, the challenge is, if we're hiding behind a mask when we're trying to foster new connections, these people that are around us, whether they're friends or in the workplace, in the community, they're not connecting with us, they're connecting with our mask. So this further promotes that sense of shame, because every time that we feel that connection, or we recognize that connection doesn't feel the way that it should, we're sending ourselves a signal every time that we're wearing or hiding behind this mask that somehow I'm defective and I'm just not good enough. So that need for connection, we don't even satiate that need, because we're not experiencing the true authentic connection. So this can be very challenging for somebody that's been through something. A lot of the individuals I work with in addiction, or they've come from incarceration, there's like, I don't want people to know that part of me, because then they won't love and accept me. So I'm going to present this other front to them so that I'll be good enough for them and I'll experience connection. Well, the challenge is you never really get the satiation of that need for connection when you're showing up like that. So what we can do, instead of, first and foremost, as I said, first connecting with ourselves. And that means connecting with our true worth, with our true strengths, with giving ourselves credit for all the amazing things that we've done in the past, not just taking credit for the negative things that we've done, but also giving ourselves credit for the good things that we've done and the good things that we're capable of. This is one of the first processes I went through with my mentor that really helped me begin to value myself more and understand and be more aware of, or more conscious of, the value that I had, so that when I experienced those connections and went forward to foster those connections, they were actually more authentic and more nurturing, and really started to fill that void.
That's beautiful. You are dumping so much incredible, wonderful stuff on us. Can you go back to what we were talking about at the beginning with your your system?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, I love sharing frameworks. It helps me better understand things, and I think explain them or articulate them to others in a way that can be helpful. But what I found is there's so much out there, just what we talked about, 31 million pathways into addiction, 31 million pathways into recovery, 340 million Americans now that all have different aspirations, different dreams, all coming from different challenges, different setbacks, different experiences in their life. what I find is this framework of this real understanding to put ourselves in the driver's seat and enable us and empower us to make those changes that we want to in our life. First and foremost, it comes, to these three things. So I think it all falls into this framework of confidence, competence, and finally capacity. So real quickly, I understand confidence as meaning this understanding, this true belief that I have the control over whatever it is that you're facing. So I have control over some outcome that I want to make in my life. If we don't have control over something, then we're not even going to make the attempt to try to change it or try to get a better outcome. So confidence just means that I have control. Competence comes to the tools and the skills that we have access to, or that we've learned, or that we've developed, that can be used to affect or make that positive change that we want. And then lastly, capacity is really our ability at the time to use the tools that we have to make the change that we know that we're capable of. And I love this, to kind of understand this. I was flying earlier this morning, so I'm a Civil Air Patrol pilot, and I was a pilot in the Marine Corps as well. So I want to imagine, if you want to take a quick journey with me. So I want you to imagine that we're stepping on a plane and we're taking off, and maybe we're going to go to an island off the coast of North Carolina. So we take off, we're in the air, we're flying to this island, and all of a sudden we start to get a warning message on our dashboard saying that something's wrong, something's broken on the plane, something needs to be dealt with. If we have the confidence, then this would say that we understand what the thing is that's wrong, whatever that warning message that popped up. Maybe there's an issue with our hydraulic system in the plane. So we see this warning message and we understand, okay, hydraulic system. I have a very good understanding of the hydraulic system. I know how to fix many different things. I even know what the specific problem is, and I know how to fix it or how to repair it. So that's the confidence that we can do something about it. Competence would be the tools. So maybe we know what we need to do to fix it, but if we don't have the tools on the plane with us, then the knowing of how to fix it isn't going to help us at all. So we need to have those tools, and we need to have them in our hand, not back in the hangar. Otherwise, we can't do anything with the knowledge that we have. And then lastly is the capacity. So we have the understanding, we have the confidence, we have the tools with us. Capacity would mean we have smooth enough air. We don't have a lot of turbulence. So if we didn't have capacity, maybe there's a lot of turbulence, maybe we're bouncing around, maybe there's a lot of rainfall. And even if we had the confidence on how to fix it and we have the tools in our hand, if we don't have a steady platform, then we can't apply that knowledge and we can't use those tools to make the change that we want to make. So now in our lives, there could be something that we want to change. Maybe we want to change something about our professional life, our finances, our physical health. And we understand that we can do something about it. So we've at least come to the conclusion that we are in control of something that will help affect that change. Then the tools might be the processes, the systems, the books, the methods, the plans that we can put together to help us affect that change. And then lastly is capacity, is we have to be able to show up in a way to do those things, to use those tools, apply those tools to affect the outcome. I've had, and no listener needs to self-identify with this, but there's certainly been times in my life where there was something I wanted to change. Maybe it was my finances, maybe it was my weight. I had the confidence that I could change it because I knew that there were some things that I could do. I even had some protocols or some systems or something, a new workout routine. I knew that if I exercised more or changed my diet, that it would create the outcome that I wanted. But sometimes I just didn't have the capacity to do those things to create the outcome that I wanted. So if we're missing any one of these, then I feel like we don't have everything that we need to affect the outcome. And this could be any outcome or anything that we want to change in our life. So when we dig into, if we look at confidence a little bit more and we dig it, we peel it back a little bit, I think some of the most important things under confidence is one, having a growth mindset. So there's a couple mindsets. It's often talked about a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. A fixed mindset says this: we have this belief that whoever we are, whatever we're good at, that's a fixed variable and it's not going to change. If I was bad at math in high school, I'm going to be bad at math the rest of my life. If I haven't been very athletic, I'm never going to be athletic. If I've always struggled with, whatever it is, that you're always going to struggle with that. If you've always been very responsive, you always had a lot of depression, that you're always going to be that way. A growth mindset is the truth that we as humans, we have the abilities to adapt and to change. So if we don't accept the fact, if we don't really embrace the fact that we can grow and we can change, and things that we struggled with yesterday, we don't need to struggle with tomorrow, that's really embodied in a growth mindset. So that's first and foremost. The second thing, or one of the second things, is a locus of control. So focusing on the things that we can control. So I understand locus of control to mean the thing that is responsible for controlling or moving whatever the variable is that we're looking at. So if we have an externalized locus of control, this means that we believe that our outcome in life, or the outcome in whatever it is that we're endeavoring, is ultimately up to things that are beyond our control. Like, okay, I want a higher income, I want better health, but I can't do anything about it because of my genetics, because there's just not access to healthier foods, there's no gym nearby. These are all things that are external to us. If we have an internalized locus of control, then this means that we're really focusing on, and we understand the things that we can change regardless of those external circumstances. And this really kind of parallels with what we were talking about in the direct and indirect sphere. So if we can internalize our locus of control, at least in the areas that we want to affect positive change, then this is taking ownership. And this really leads into the third thing that's most important, is taking responsibility. Not looking for the things that we can't control or the things that we can't do, but what are the responses that we can do differently in order to get different outcomes? And if we're willing to accept more responsibility for things in our life, then this helps really put us in the driver's seat, or empowers us to make those changes that we want to make. There's always going to be things out there that we can influence or affect. But if we're focused on that, if our awareness is more on those things than on the things that we can do differently, then we're never going to make a change. If we can focus on those things that we actually do have dominion over, control over, then that's where real change can begin. So that all talks about confidence. The next thing that we mentioned was competence. So these are the tools and the processes, and depending on who you are and what your goals are or what changes you want to make, there can be a long list of tools, and processes. If you haven't recently been into a major public library, every time I step into one, I just kind of get overwhelmed at all the information that's out there. And the truth is that no matter where you are or what you're struggling with, it's likely that somebody else has been in a similar situation or wanted a similar outcome in their life. So there's some proof out there, there's some tools out there, there's some processes, pathways, and things out there. And I really think that every tool or process or something that we've been exposed to in our life, these are great things that we can put into our toolbox to make change. I studied applied positive psychology for a period of time. And what I love about the framework of applied positive psychology is it looks at different pathways to human flourishing. And it recognizes that there's positivity or emotional resilience, that there's things that affect our engagement, our relationships, our sense of meaning and purpose and achievement. And what I love about that framework is I looked back at all of the self-help stuff and all of the great books that I read, and I was like, oh, this idea, this kind of falls into this folder here. That's a great recognition to have, because the other part of that is that any of those pathways, if we are totally negligent of that pathway, then this can be a vulnerability that kind of prevents our growth forward. So we can have all the emotional resilience and positivity. We can be very in touch with our strengths that we have. We can have some great goals and some tools that can help us in our achievement. But if our relationships are not good, if the outside influences are not good, or if we really have no sense of meaning or purpose in our life, then these can be things that are going to hold us back and always prevent us. So that really talks about competence. And then the last thing, capacity. And we started to touch on this earlier, but capacity is the ability to do those things that we want to do in order to make those change. So if I want to lose 10 pounds and I believe that I can do it, and I know that I can, there's XYZ exercises I can do and ABC foods that I can eat and, XYZ foods I shouldn't eat. I have that knowledge. We need to have the capacity to follow through on that and to do things. And as we talked about, if we're in this place where we're carrying all this stuff on our plate and we have all these things that we haven't processed or let go of or dealt with, it makes us more reactionary, more in that fight or flight state, more in the mammal mind. And this kind of, this alleviates all of our ability to make those positive changes. So there's a lot of things that we can do and daily practices that we can invite into our life in order to have that capacity to follow through on the changes that we want to make, whether it's self-care, whether it's daily breath work, whether it's developing an understanding of our willpower and what our willpower is and how we can better manage that, or whether it's doing some other things to help us develop that emotional resilience. All of these things come together to help provide that capacity.
So as far as positive psychology, it is mind-blowing that it didn't even come in. Was it 89 or 99 that it?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think some elements of it were kind of coming forward, but when Seligman really kind of codified it into the study of and the message of, and for those that aren't very familiar with positive psychology, what I understand of traditional psychology is more a look of what's wrong with us. What are the elements? What are the challenges? What are the diagnoses, the defects that an individual might have? And how can we mitigate that or help them move through some of those things that are holding them down so they can get to a better place? Positive psychology looks at the opposite end of the spectrum. It's like, what's going well in somebody's life? What do they have that's good about them and going well for them? And how do we leverage that to make positive change in other areas? So it's a different, it's to the same end. Like we're still trying to help somebody experience a better version of their life. It's just kind of two different approaches, about it. And they can complement each other very well. I love the analogy of a hot air balloon. If a hot air balloon is trying to take off and you want to go to a higher altitude, traditional psychology is looking at those sandbags or the things in our life that are holding us back, either from our past or things that we're dealing with presently, some of the symptoms, some of the diagnoses that we have. Whereas positive psychology, it's more looking at the hot air balloon, like how do we get more hot air into this thing to greater lift so that we can go higher. So with that analogy, it's easy to understand. If you want to get as high as you can, you got to deal with those sandbags, and you've got to increase the size or the hot air in that balloon so you can get to a better place. I think life is very much the same way.
Yeah, and guys, I just want to emphasize, please, 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 if all you knew about psychology was before, I think it was 1989. I'm not sure. It might have been 99, but I think it was 1989. If all you knew about psychology was that, and about going to get help and talking to someone was that, and it's like, oh no, I'm not doing that. I don't blame you, but you can look for someone who focuses, and you can get a coach who can do the same thing. So how can people get to know who you are personally? How can they interact with you if they want to know more?
Yeah, so great. So first and foremost, I'd encourage everybody to please go and check out my TEDx talk. You can view it at unspokentrauma.vet. And if you know a veteran, if you are a veteran, please go check it out and share it with anybody that you know. I think this is going to be huge on helping veterans better transition. And also anybody else who's had a transition in their life, I think they'll see similarities and find some value for what they can do to make some change in their life. So certainly check that out. And then best place to connect with me is probably on LinkedIn. You can just search for my name and find me on LinkedIn. If there's anything I can do to support you, then please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always happy to share resources and anything that's helped me. But if there's one thing that I could share with your audience, or really with anybody that's listening, if you're in a dark place, if you're in a bad place, if you've been struggling with something, first and foremost, I want you to know that you are lovable and acceptable just as you are. That maybe there's some things in your life that aren't going the way that you want it to, but that doesn't mean that you're not worthy of and deserving of greater happiness, greater fulfillment, greater joy in your life. So that first and foremost, know and understand that. And if you don't know that for yourself right now, know that I believe it about you, and it's absolutely true. Also know that no matter what you've tried in the past, if you've continued to struggle with something and not been able to affect that change that you want in your life, continue to look for tools and resources to help you get to that better place. First and foremost, you're deserving of it. Secondly, there's tools, there's mentors, there's coaches, there's somebody out there that can help you get to the place that you want to get to.
Very cool. Very last question, and it's always everybody has to answer it. Tips, tricks to help our people live their epic life.
I think it comes back to what I just said. So first and foremost, understanding that you are deserving of an epic life. That, like, life is not supposed to be about suffering and challenges and just trying to overcome the next thing that's thrown at you. We need to do that and continue to create and build our best life. So I hope that framework about the confidence, competence, and capacity might illuminate some ideas or re-encourage you or re-inspire you to dig into a challenge that you've been facing in your life. And whatever it is, continue to search for those tools and resources. I think that obstacles, they show up, or challenges, they show up in our life for one of two reasons. One is to give us an opportunity to develop the skills, the awareness, the strengths that we need to ultimately get to the goal that we've set, or the place that the place that we want to be. There's a Stoic philosophy that the obstacle is the way. And this is really what I understand. This obstacle is placed before this internal challenge that we're dealing with. It's shown up because of what we want in our life, and it's the pathway to get there. The other reason an obstacle or challenge might show up is because it's a sign that's saying, like, hey, you're going down the wrong road. It's time to make a change. So it's might be challenging to discern that, in the instance or in the situation, but realize that one of those two things is happening. Either you're getting some external guidance or some external feedback that you need to make a course correction or take another road, or what you want is being delivered to you through the obstacles and the challenges that show up.
Okay. Thank you so much for your service. First and foremost, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very, very genuinely from me and my audience. And thank you for just giving us so much wisdom today. We appreciate it, Garret.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you.